Oh, hello everyone, and welcome to a very special Christmas edition of the Word of the Day podcast, where useful words are pleasantly explained. My name is Jamie Silva, I am your host, and we've got a nice festive episode for you today, though we are recording it with just a skeleton crew, since I sent most of the staff home for the holiday, plus the entire band, which is why I have to provide the music for today's episode myself. So, if you like amateur harmonica caroling, you'll definitely want to stick around for the end of the show. But anyway, let's take a look at today's word. If you already saw the episode title, you might think I'm about to pleasantly explain a useful letter. But no, the letter O, just by itself, is also a word. And more importantly, it is a different word than O spelt with an H. And let's actually start with O as in OH. And this is one of those words that is so simple, so common and basic, that it's actually pretty difficult to define. In a way, O with an H kind of works as filler, in the sense that any sentence with O in it, you could probably take out the O and it would mean basically the same thing. Like if I were to say, oh look, there's a cloud up there that looks like Taj Mahal. Here, the O doesn't really seem to add much. Like starting directly with look, here's a cloud, etc., that would function just fine. But that doesn't mean O serves no purpose at all in the sentence. In this context, and many others, O might convey the sense that I just noticed the cloud, or am interrupting myself or someone else to comment on it, or I'm pleasantly surprised by the coincidence of noticing a cloud Taj Mahal just as my friends and I were talking about my recent trip to India, something like that. A lot, of course, depends on the context and how I say it, but without the O, I think you lose a sense of immediacy, a sense that the thought, whatever it was, occurred to you right then, and you couldn't help but express it. And look, there are a lot more ways to use O as in OH than this, more than I can go into in depth in this episode, but let's actually explore a couple meanings, because it's really going to help set up this contrast between O without the H. As an exclamation, O with an H can help you express all sorts of emotions or reactions, like surprise, for example, by saying, oh wow, or if it's a bad surprise, oh no. It also works for disappointment, i.e., oh, what a pity, excitement, oh yay, etc. More broadly, OH can act as like a verbal signal that you're listening to someone, even via such simple interjections as, oh yeah, or oh or oh yeah, and many others. And I think it's often a pleasant and approachable way to convey that impression, like it can soften what might otherwise be pretty blunt statements. For example, if someone asks you to go ice skating with them this weekend, a reply of, sorry, that's not going to work for me, sounds harsher than, oh, sorry, that's not going to work for me. The last usage I want to cover for OH is as a way to greet or address someone, especially in a way that gets their attention, as in, oh hey, Gary, it's good to see you. Or maybe like, oh sir, yes, you sir, thank you. I'm looking for the returns department. Can you point me in the right direction? So, to sum up, the OH form of O is clearly very versatile, with lots of uses. But it's this last sense that's closest to the form of O that I want to focus on today, that is, O without the H, which is pronounced in exactly the same way, but probably not said in exactly the same way. Here's what I mean by that. See, this form, the O without the H form, is most commonly used when you're addressing someone or something, but in a very public, probably even poetic way. To continue with our prior example, if I say, oh look, a cloud, you can tell by how I said it that this is more the casual, reactive version, using O with an H. But if you wished to wax poetic and address the cloud directly, as if it could hear you, perhaps, you might say, in a loud and lofty tone, O cloud, perched high in the sky, blown here and there by the ever-changing breezes, what sights you must see, O cloud, what lessons you could teach us here below. Especially, of course, lessons about local topography and weather patterns. Okay, so here you would most definitely be using O without the H, because you're not reacting to the cloud or expressing an emotion per se, you're calling out to it, you're addressing the cloud, and more importantly, you're doing so in this poetic, fancy, even theatrical sort of way. And as a quick aside, it is difficult to explain all of this verbally because the simplest distinction between the two forms of O is a visual one, right? It's based on the spelling. But here's a good way to keep track of the difference as you listen. As we all know from the great book Anne of Green Gables, Anne, spelt with an E, is, and I quote, a perfectly elegant name, and so much more distinguished than Anne without the E, which is, and again I quote, unromantic. So, the parallel here is that O spelt with an H is the unromantic version, and O just by itself is probably distinguished and elegant, romantic, all of those things. And I would guess that a lot of you kind of know this already, because you've seen O without the H before in many settings, whether you noticed it at the time or not. It's inescapable in Shakespeare, for example, with perhaps the most famous example being the line, "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" Here, as we would expect, Juliet is addressing Romeo, or more accurately, addressing the idea of Romeo, since she can't actually see him when she's saying this. Now, imagine, if Juliet had used O with an H here instead of without, I think she'd be saying something totally different. Something like, "Oh yeah, Romeo, by the way, as long as you're here, how about we elope?" This is much more casual, right? And I think not quite as romantic either. Now, we've covered addressing people and objects with O without the H, but there is some evidence you can even address abstract concepts with it also. Although, I'm not even sure that you can call it addressing per se if the things you're talking to or about are intangible, but I do have a couple examples here and you can judge for yourself. The first is this Latin saying, O tempora, O mores, which literally translates to, O the times, O the customs. This was originally said by the famous Roman thinker, political figure, and orator Cicero in this really harsh speech he was making against another politician named Catiline, who he, Cicero, suspected of wrongdoing. Here, Cicero is basically saying, like, wow, what is society coming to? I can't believe the age I'm living in, where people can get away with such outrageous, even criminal behavior. Whatever happened to the good old days? Rome just ain't what it used to be, etc. And actually, you can still use the Latin phrase today if you want to express similar sentiments, but of course, in reference to the times or customs of our day, and specifically whichever ones you don't like or disapprove of. The English version, O the times, O the customs, is fine too. But whichever you use, be sure to say it in the O without the H style. Otherwise, you'd just be like, oh, the times. Oh, look, some customs, whatever, which isn't so dramatic. Now, while sadly I was unable to find a clip of Cicero saying O tempora, O mores, I do have audio of this next example. It comes from a radio broadcast of the final flight of the Hindenburg, which, as you may know, was this enormous blimp-type passenger aircraft that technically was not a blimp because blimps have no internal structure supporting their shape, whereas the Hindenburg did, which makes it a, quote, rigid airship instead, which is not to be confused with a dirigible or Zeppelin, but I digress. So, this non-blimp famously crashed in May 1937, and a radio announcer by the name of Herbert Morrison was on hand to describe the accident. Take a listen.
The back motors of the ship are just holding it just enough to keep it from bursting the flame. Get the Charlie. It's crashing, and it's crashing. It's crashing terrible. Oh, my, get out of the way, please. It's running and bursting into flames, and it's falling on the mooring craft, and all the folks would believe that this is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world. Oh, 400 or 500 feet into the sky. The humanity, all the birds. I can't talk, baby, to gentlemen.
Now, setting aside the undeniably tragic nature of the event in question, the key phrase in the announcer's description, and the one that later entered into the popular lexicon and is still referenced to this day, is, right there at the end, "Oh, the humanity." This might sound like it's expressing a similar sentiment to "Oh, the times, oh, the customs," but because of the circumstances of its popularization, it is best paired specifically with disasters or accidents as a way to acknowledge and lament the fact that terrible things happen sometimes. Existence is full of suffering as well as joy, and sometimes all one can do is just contemplate the breadth of human experience. And despite its sad origins, mostly nowadays, "Oh, the humanity" is used by people ironically overreacting to relatively small accidents or inconveniences. Perhaps similarly to how people might say the struggle is real if they run out of ketchup before finishing their fries. Now, most transcriptions of this broadcast that I came across spell the O in "Oh, the humanity" with an H, but I think there is a pretty strong argument to be made for the reverse. I mean, we can't say for sure because the original phrase was spoken, not written, but again, I feel like the OH version would have sounded more like, "Oh, humanity, how about that?" which is totally different. On the other hand, there are some who say the announcer, Herbert Morrison, was already accustomed to referring to a large group of people gathered together as humanity, in which case, "Oh, the humanity" would just be a way to express his shock and concern that the people on the Hindenburg, or those on the ground waiting for it to land, were in grave danger. And in that setting, O with an H works just fine. But even though we can't nail down what he actually meant here, I think it's fair to say that in common usage today, those who say, "Oh, the humanity" are, facetiously or otherwise, addressing the abstract concept of humanity. and they're doing it in an elevated or poetic way, and therefore O without the H is the proper form. Okay, we've come a long way here, but at last we can discuss the real reason I picked the word O for this oh-so-special Christmas episode. If you look for it, you will find the H-less O scattered throughout a host of Christmas carols, including the one you heard at the top of this broadcast, which hopefully was recognizable as O Christmas Tree, or alternatively O Tannenbaum. Here, the singers appear to be addressing the tree, flattering it in all sorts of ways, probably making it insufferable to be around as a result, but you get the idea. O is being used as an elevated form of address. Elsewhere in the Christmas Carol catalog, we see O Tidings of Comfort and Joy, O Come All Ye Faithful, O Come Let Us Adore Him, O Come, Emmanuel, O Star of Wonder, Star of Light from We Three Kings, O Little Town of Bethlehem, O Holy Night, etc. And I say etc. because there are probably more examples, but those are all I've thought of so far. It's still a lot, though. You'll notice, by the way, that most all of these are your old-timey Christmas carols, which makes sense because O without the H is an old-fashioned term. There's a reason we aren't singing like Oh Jingle Bell Rock or Oh All I Want for Christmas Is You, that sort of thing. Some, by the way, might argue that we should count the line, oh by golly, have a holly jolly Christmas, but I don't know about that. The context just isn't poetic or elegant enough. It's more folksy and, well, jolly, which is not what O without the H is all about. But anyway, O's without H's are all over the place in the Christmas season, and I encourage you to look for them. If anyone's Christmas habits strike you as objectionable, or perhaps just not the way things were done when you were young, you're free to exclaim, "Oh the times, oh the customs," or the Latin version if you prefer, which again is "O tempora, o mores." Likewise, if a situation arises where, say, you put real live candles on your Christmas tree like they did in the olden days, and then the tree bursts into flame, and all the ornaments and trinkets and little baubles on it start melting, and you have to douse the tree using the entire eggnog supply, a reasonable reaction to all of this might be to shout, "Oh, the humanity," and then get busy making some more eggnog, because no Christmas party can last for long after it runs out. Alrighty, folks, I think I'll let those scenarios serve as the examples, which means that is going to do it for me, and that'll do it for today's show. May I say a very Merry Christmas to all of those celebrating this fine holiday from all of us here at the show. And the staff, of course, sends their holiday greetings in absentia, since, as you recall, they're all at home right now, along with the band. And speaking of which, as we say goodnight from the RAV4 studios, I suppose I'll just have to play myself out. This has been another edition of the Word of the Day podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Silva. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.